Get out of my bank. Now. The words didn't echo. They sliced. The branch manager's finger was already in the air, rigid, accusatory, aimed straight at the woman standing on the other side of the counter. Her other hand clutched a phone, pressed tight to her ear, as if authority itself were calling back. Behind her, two uniformed police officers stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, watchful, heavy with implication. The bank had gone still. Keyboards stopped clicking. Pens hovered mid-signature. Even the low hum of conversation dissolved, replaced by something thicker, charged. The kind of quiet that comes right before a mistake is made. The woman being ordered out did not move. She stood calmly, hands relaxed at her sides, posture straight but unarmed. No designer bag, no flashy jewelry, just a muted blue sweater, dark slacks, and an expression that revealed nothing. Her eyes stayed on the manager, not defiant, not fearful, simply present. That, more than anything, seemed to irritate her. "I said now," the manager snapped again, louder this time, her voice rising to perform for the room. "This is private property. You are not a verified client, and you are disrupting business." One of the officers shifted his weight. The leather of his belt creaked softly. A reminder, a warning. Still, the woman didn't speak. A few customers exchanged glances. Someone near the back slowly raised their phone, hesitated, then lowered it again. No one wanted to be first. No one wanted to be involved yet. The manager exhaled sharply into the phone. "Yes," she said, eyes never leaving her target. "She's refusing to comply." Refusing. The word hung there, unfair and deliberate. The woman finally blinked. Once. Slowly. As if she were cataloging the moment rather than reacting to it. As if she'd been here before, as if she already knew how this part usually went. The officers took a half step forward, not enough to touch her, but enough to remind everyone who carried sanctioned force in this room. That was when the narrator's voice slips in, low and measured. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her." The woman's gaze drifted, just briefly, across the bank. Marble floors, frosted glass offices, a logo polished to perfection on the far wall, an institution built on trust and moments like this. She had said nothing, not because she had nothing to say, but because silence, when misunderstood, has a way of inviting people to reveal exactly who they are. The manager mistook that silence for weakness, and the room was about to learn the cost of that assumption. Silence has weight. In that bank, it pressed down on everyone except the woman standing at the center of it. The manager expected an argument by now, a raised voice, an explanation, something she could interrupt, correct, or shut down. That was how these moments usually went. Noise met with louder noise, emotion crushed by authority. But the woman gave her nothing. No protest. No pleading. Not even a sigh. Her stillness unsettled the room. The manager lowered her phone slightly, eyes narrowing as she studied the woman again, really studied her this time. The clothes were simple. Too simple. Clean, intentional, but unremarkable. No visible markers of status. No visual cues that demanded deference. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it became the justification. "Ma'am," the manager said, her tone shifting into something rehearsed and sharp, "your refusal to respond is being noted. If you do not leave immediately, we will proceed with removal." Removal. Another word chosen carefully. Not escort. Not ask. Removal implied necessity. Safety. Policy. One of the officers glanced sideways at his partner. A silent check-in. They were still waiting, still watching. The woman finally moved, but only enough to shift her weight slightly, heels grounded, shoulders squared. She did not look at the officers. She did not look at the other customers. She looked only at the manager. Her expression didn't change. That was when a ripple moved through the bank. A teller near the windows hesitated, fingers frozen above the keyboard. A man waiting in line cleared his throat, then thought better of speaking. Somewhere behind the glass offices, a door clicked shut too quietly, too deliberately. The manager felt it, the attention. The room slipping out of her control. "Do you have any idea how serious this is?" she snapped, volume rising again. You can't just stand there. This is a financial institution. We have procedures. Procedures. The woman's eyes flickered just once. Not in fear, in recognition. She had heard that word before, in other buildings, other cities, other moments dressed up as professionalism. The officer on the left took another half step forward. "Ma'am," he said, neutral but firm, "we need you to comply with the manager's request." Comply. There it was again. The language stacking up, building a case out of tone and posture rather than facts. The woman inhaled slowly through her nose, not to calm herself but to steady the room. Her hands remained visible, relaxed, open. Still, she said nothing. That was when the manager's confidence began to crack, not outwardly, not yet, but in the smallest ways. A tightening jaw, a blink held too long, the phone in her hand lowered completely now, forgotten. Silence was no longer working in her favor. It was working against her, because in that quiet, people had time to think. And thinking, in places like this, is dangerous. The manager straightened, preparing to escalate again, one final push to force the outcome she expected. She didn't know it yet, but she was already too late. The manager decided silence was no longer tolerable. "If you're not going to speak," she said sharply, turning just enough for the officers to hear, "then we'll proceed under suspected fraud." The word landed heavier than the others. Fraud. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was delivered with the calm confidence of someone who knew how powerful accusations sounded when wrapped in procedure. A few heads snapped up. Fraud changed things. Fraud gave shape to discomfort. It gave people permission. One officer adjusted his stance, hand hovering closer to his radio. Not aggressive. Prepared. The woman finally turned her head just slightly, acknowledging the word without reacting to it. Her face remained composed, but something behind her eyes sharpened. Not anger. Memory. The manager continued, emboldened now. "You failed to identify yourself as a client. You refused to comply with a lawful request. That's enough to escalate." Enough. She glanced toward the nearest teller. "Pull her activity," she said. "Flag anything irregular." The teller hesitated. It was barely noticeable, a fraction of a second too long before her fingers moved, but the delay rippled through the room. Doubt always arrives quietly first. I don't see an account under that name," the teller said finally, eyes still on the screen. "At least, not on this interface." The manager seized it. "There, you see?" she said, turning back to the woman. "Nothing comes up, which means you don't belong here." Belong. The woman's lips pressed together briefly, not in shame, in restraint. The officer spoke again, more firmly this time. "Ma'am, if you can provide identification or confirm your purpose here, this will go a lot easier." Easier for whom wasn't said. The woman's gaze dropped not to the floor, but to the polished counter between them. She studied its reflection, the way the overhead lights fractured across marble and glass. She had walked into rooms like this her entire life, always aware of how quickly comfort could turn conditional. At 23, they'd frozen her account without explanation. At 31, they'd questioned the source of her funds twice. At 42, they'd asked her assistant instead of her. The faces changed. The language stayed the same. "I'm asking you one last time," the manager said, voice tight now. "State your business, or we proceed." If you ever God, around them, the bank no longer felt neutral. It felt aligned. Every policy, every phrase, every uniformed presence leaning subtly in one direction. The woman lifted her eyes again slowly, deliberately, and met the manager's stare. She still didn't speak, but the room felt it. The shift. The pressure. The moment when an accusation becomes a line you can't step back from. The manager didn't realize it yet, but by choosing fraud, she had crossed it. The accusation changed the room. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the subtle ways that mattered, the way people leaned back instead of forward, the way eyes shifted from curiosity to caution. Fraud made everyone a little more distant, a little more willing to let whatever happened next happen. The manager felt it too. The momentum. She straightened her blazer and stepped out from behind the counter, closing the distance by a few deliberate feet, close enough to dominate, close enough to be seen. "I need you to step away from the counter," she said, pointing now, her finger sharp and unwavering. "You're drawing attention." drawing attention, as if the spectacle hadn't already been staged around her. The woman remained where she was. The pointing finger stayed suspended in the air longer than it should have, awkward, exposed, a silent demand waiting to be obeyed. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Ma'am, please," he said, trying to soften what couldn't be softened. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Harder." The manager exhaled through her nose, irritation slipping through the cracks of her professionalism. "This is exactly the problem," she said loudly now, no longer pretending the room wasn't listening. "People think they can just walk in here and challenge authority. Challenge." The woman's eyes moved not to the manager, but past her, to the customers lining the marble floor, to the people pretending to scroll on their phones while missing nothing, to the reflection of herself in the glass, calm, contained, unmistakably present. A young man near the entrance shifted uncomfortably. A woman clutching a folder pressed it tighter to her chest. No one spoke. The manager's voice sharpened. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said, each word clean and cutting. "This behavior only confirms our concerns." Concerns. Another layer. Another justification. She turned to the officers, gesturing broadly now, inviting them into the performance. "She's uncooperative. We've followed procedure. At this point, she needs to be removed." Removed. The word echoed differently when spoken in front of witnesses. One officer glanced around the room before responding. Not because he disagreed, but because he understood the optics. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we're still assessing the situation." The manager shot him a look. "There's nothing to assess," she snapped. "She doesn't belong here." Belong. The woman finally reacted not with words, but with posture. She straightened fully now, shoulders back, chin level, not defensive, declarative. The room noticed. For the first time, the manager hesitated. It was brief, almost invisible, but it was there. Because humiliation only works when the other person accepts it. And this woman hadn't. The air felt tighter. Phones came out again this time, less discreetly. Someone near the back whispered, "This doesn't feel right." The manager heard it. Her jaw clenched. Her authority, once effortless, now required force, volume, repetition. She raised her voice again, louder than before, pushing it across the room like a command she expected to bounce back obediently. Instead, it hung there, unanswered. And in that pause, just a beat too long, the balance of the room began to shift. Not toward justice. Not yet. But away from her, the moment stretched. Not outward, but inward. As the manager's last word faded, the woman felt something old surface. Not anger, not fear, recognition. The kind that arrives uninvited, carrying years with it. She had been here before. Not this bank, not this city, but this posture, this tone, this quiet narrowing of space around her. At 23, it had been a smaller branch, beige walls, cheap carpet. She remembered the teller's smile tightening when the deposit slip crossed the counter. The pause. The sudden need for a supervisor. The words, "unusual activity," spoken carefully, as if politeness could soften suspicion. She'd stood just like this then, too. Calm, confused, certain of what she'd earned. They froze her account for 48 hours. At 31, it was a loan office, glass desk, framed mission statements on the wall. She'd come prepared, numbers clean, collateral solid, credit impeccable. The officer nodded through her presentation, then leaned back and asked, almost casually, where the money originally came from. She'd answered. It hadn't mattered. At 42, it was a conference room, not unlike this one. Different stakes, bigger numbers. A junior associate had turned not to her but to the man beside her, asked him to confirm her decision. She hadn't corrected him. She'd corrected the structure that hired him. Now, standing in this bank, she felt the pattern complete itself. Same playbook, new faces, identical confidence that the system would back them. The manager mistook the woman's stillness for retreat. "She's deliberately avoiding engagement," she said to the officers, voice clipped. "That's a red flag. Red flag." The woman's jaw set not in defiance, but in resolve. Around them, the room waited. Not breathlessly, not dramatically, just alert, tuned to the frequency of something about to tip. The woman glanced once more at the floor, then lifted her gaze not to the manager this time, but beyond her, to the structure itself, the screens, the desks, the systems humming quietly behind the walls. She understood something the manager did not. This moment wasn't personal. It never was. It was procedural, predictable, designed to pressure the wrong people into shrinking. And she had spent too many years building power precisely so she wouldn't have to. The officer cleared his throat again. "Ma'am," he said, a touch less certain now. "If you could just state your name for the record." The woman inhaled slowly. Not to speak. Not yet. But to mark the moment. Because once she did, there would be no rewinding it, no quiet correction, no saving face. The manager glanced at her watch, impatient. "We don't have all day," she snapped. "Make a decision." "I have a reasoned." The woman finally moved her hand. Not upward, not in surrender. Sideways. Into her coat pocket. The room stiffened. Not because of what they thought she might pull out, but because of what she didn't. A weapon would have been simple. What came next would not be. And for the first time since this began, the manager felt it too. The shift. The sense that the past had finished repeating itself, and something else was about to start. The woman withdrew her hand from her coat pocket slowly. Not dramatically, not defensively. She held a phone. No rush, no tension in her fingers. Just a clean, deliberate motion that suggested intent rather than reaction. The manager let out a short, humorless laugh. "Recording us now?" she said, loud enough for the room. "That won't help you." The woman didn't look at her. She looked at the screen, unlocked it with a single touch, then raised it not to her ear yet, but just high enough for the manager and the officers to see that she wasn't hiding anything. "I'm not recording," she said calmly. It was the first time she'd spoken. The room leaned in without realizing it. Her voice wasn't soft. It wasn't loud. It was measured, even. Untouched by the tension everyone else seemed trapped inside. "I'm calling my assistant." The manager scoffed. "Your assistant?" she repeated, incredulous. "Ma'am, this is a serious situation." The woman's eyes lifted. "Exactly." She turned slightly away from the counter, not retreating but repositioning, as if aligning herself with something invisible but already in motion. The line connected. "Yes," she said into the phone. "It's happening." A pause. "Bank branch. Downtown." Another pause. Then quieter but unmistakably firm. "Activate protocol." She ended the call. No explanation followed. The manager stared at her for a beat, then shook her head. "I don't know who you think you're calling," she said sharply. "But this doesn't change anything." She gestured to the officers. "Proceed." One of them hesitated. Not long, not enough to defy instruction, but enough to register doubt. At the same moment, a faint sound cut through the room. A chime, then another. The manager's phone vibrated in her hand. She ignored it. A teller's screen refreshed unexpectedly. Rows of data flickered, then stalled. The cursor froze mid-blink. Behind the glass offices, a door opened. Someone whispered a name. The woman stood perfectly still, phone now resting at her side. She didn't watch the screens. She watched the people. The manager felt irritation spike. "Enough!" she snapped, tapping her phone awake, then stopping. Her expression faltered. Just slightly. The officers' radios crackled. A burst of static. Then, silence. "What is this?" the manager muttered, more to herself than anyone else. The woman spoke again, her voice unchanged. "You accused me of fraud," she said evenly. "You escalated without verification. And now you're about to find out what that costs." The manager looked up sharply. "You don't get to threaten me." "I'm not," the woman replied. "I'm documenting." A beat. Then the manager's phone vibrated again. Harder this time. Persistent. Around them, the bank felt different, less certain, less obedient. Systems didn't argue. They just responded. The manager finally looked at her screen, and whatever she saw there drained the color from her face. She looked up slowly. For the first time since this began, she didn't speak. And in that silence, everyone understood the same thing at once. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a reckoning. The shift didn't announce itself. It moved quietly through posture, through tone, through the sudden uncertainty in places that had always assumed they were right. A junior teller near the far window frowned at her screen. She tapped a key. Nothing happened. She tapped again, harder this time, then glanced toward her supervisor. Marlene? She said, keeping her voice low. My access just went read-only. The manager didn't respond. She was still staring at her phone, scrolling, refreshing, her thumb moving faster now. The confidence she'd worn minutes earlier no longer fit the moment. It slid, then cracked. One of the officers shifted again. This time, it wasn't procedural, it was instinct. What's going on? He asked quietly, not to the woman, but to the room. No one answered him. Behind the glass offices, a man in a navy suit stepped out, scanning the floor with growing concern. He walked quickly to a terminal, typed something, then stopped. His shoulders stiffened. That's not right, he muttered. The woman watched all of it with the same calm she'd held since the beginning. She didn't smile. She didn't react. Because this wasn't the moment for satisfaction. This was the moment for clarity. The manager finally looked up from her phone. Who did you call? She demanded, voice sharper than she intended. What did you do? The woman met her gaze. I didn't do anything, she said. I let the system respond. The manager scoffed, but it landed hollow. This branch operates independently, she snapped. You can't just... A soft voice cut in. I'm sorry, the junior teller said, louder now, unable to keep it contained. Her name just flagged. Every head turned. The manager spun toward her. What do you mean flagged? The teller swallowed. Not for fraud, she said quickly. For, she stopped, eyes darting to the woman, then back to her screen. For executive-level review. The words didn't make sense at first. Executive-level review wasn't something customers triggered. It was something institutions did to themselves. That's impossible, the manager said. We would know. The woman finally stepped forward, not toward the counter, but into the open space between everyone, the center of the room, the place no one else wanted to stand. Would you? She asked calmly. The officer nearest her looked between the two women, then down at his radio as it buzzed again. This time a voice came through, low, urgent. Stand by, it said. Do not escalate. He stiffened. Copy, he replied, eyes never leaving the woman. The manager's breath caught. Escalate what? She asked sharply. The woman tilted her head slightly. Not in challenge, in assessment. This, she said. What you turned this into. The room felt smaller now. Not because of walls, but because the truth had entered it, and there was nowhere left to hide from it. The manager's authority had relied on one assumption, that the woman in front of her had nowhere to stand once challenged. She had been wrong. And the witnesses, the tellers, the officers, the customers were beginning to understand it too, not because the woman demanded belief, but because the system had started to speak for her. The bank no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a waiting room. No one knew what they were waiting for, only that something irreversible had already been set in motion. The woman stood at the center of it all, unhurried, her presence steady in a room that had begun to tremble at its edges. She wasn't watching the manager anymore. She was listening to the rhythm of systems adjusting, to the quiet signals people miss when they're used to being in control. The manager cleared her throat. This is getting out of hand, she said, forcing firmness back into her voice. Whatever glitch you think you caused, it won't protect you from removal. The words sounded weaker now. One of the officers shifted closer, not toward the woman, but toward the manager. Subtle, protective, a recalibration. The woman glanced at him briefly, then back to the manager. You should stop, she said evenly. The manager laughed again, sharp and brittle. Stop what? Stacking decisions you can't undo. Now. A phone rang behind the counter, then another. A muted chorus of vibrations followed desks, pockets, drawers lighting up one after another. The sound moved through the room like a signal flare. A man in the navy suit answered his call. His face tightened as he listened. He turned away, lowering his voice. Yes, I understand. I'll inform her. He hung up and hesitated, then walked toward the manager. She noticed. What is it? She snapped. He stopped a few feet away. Compliance is asking questions, he said carefully. They want a timeline, names, exact language used. The manager froze. Compliance doesn't. They do now. The woman spoke again, quietly but clearly. When you escalated to fraud without verification, you triggered mandatory review, she said. That includes audio, logs, and witness accounts. The manager stared at her. You don't know how our systems work. The woman met her gaze. I helped design them. Too, tenpeted. The words didn't land like a punch. They landed like a door closing. The room inhaled as one. The officer nearest the manager pressed a finger to his earpiece again. His posture changed, not defensive, not aggressive, respectful. Understood, he said. We'll hold position. Hold position. The manager looked from him to the woman, then to the staff now openly watching. Phones no longer hidden, eyes no longer averted. You set me up, she said, voice low, accusatory. The woman shook her head once. No, she replied. I tested you. She took a step closer, not invading space, but claiming it. You could have asked, she continued. You could have verified. You could have treated me like a person before treating me like a problem. Silence followed. Not the heavy silence of intimidation. The quiet of realization. The manager swallowed. Her authority, once unquestioned, now hung by threads she hadn't known existed. Somewhere deep in the building, a printer whirred to life. The woman glanced toward the sound, then back at the room. This part, she said calmly, is where it usually ends. She paused. But today, she added, we're going to finish it properly. No one spoke. No one moved. Because everyone finally understood the same thing. The reveal wasn't coming. It had already arrived. The systems moved faster than the people. That was always how it happened. While the manager stood frozen, still trying to regain footing through posture and tone, the infrastructure beneath her authority continued its quiet work, unemotional, precise, irreversible. A printer near the glass offices spat out a page, then another. A compliance officer picked one up, scanned it, and stiffened. He didn't announce anything. He didn't have to. The way his shoulders squared told the story before words ever could. The manager noticed. What is that? She demanded. He hesitated just long enough to choose his words carefully. An incident report, he said. Auto-generated. Her eyes widened. Auto-generated? That requires escalation, he finished. The woman watched her absorb it, not with satisfaction, with recognition. This was the moment power always misunderstood the point where confidence realizes it was never in control of the machinery it relied on. One of the tellers spoke up again, voice trembling now. My terminal just locked, she said. It says access suspended pending review. Another voice followed from behind the counter. Mine too. The room began to murmur. Not outrage, not panic, calculation. The officer nearest the manager shifted his stance once more. This time, he stepped back, creating space between himself and her. A subtle move. But everyone saw it. Ma'am, he said carefully, we've been instructed to stand down. The manager stared at him. Stand down from what? From removal, he replied. Silence fell hard. The manager's face flushed. This is my branch, she said sharply. You take orders from me while you're in this building. The officer didn't argue. He didn't need to. He simply raised his radio slightly. Negative, he said into it. We're holding. The woman spoke again, her voice steady, carrying without force. When you involved law enforcement under false pretenses, she said. You widened the scope. The manager snapped her head around. False pretenses? You accused me of fraud without evidence, the woman replied. You documented refusal where there was none, and you escalated publicly. Each word landed like a checkbox being marked. That's not how this works, the manager said, but the certainty was gone now. You don't get to rewrite events. I don't have to, the woman said. They're already logged. A chime echoed from the manager's phone. Then another. A new email appeared, bolded, urgent, unavoidable. She opened it. Read the first line. And for the first time since she'd raised her voice, her hands began to shake. Around them, the room held its breath. Customers no longer whispered. Staff no longer pretended to work. Everyone understood they were watching something rare, not a confrontation, but a collapse. The manager looked up slowly, eyes scanning the room as if searching for an ally who no longer existed. This is a misunderstanding, she said weakly. We can correct this. The woman stepped forward once more, stopping just short of her, close enough to be heard without raising her voice. You already did, she said. Just not the way you thought. Acted. The bank felt different now. Not hostile. Exposed. And in that exposure, one truth became undeniable. The room had stopped waiting. It had started witnessing. The room didn't explode. It didn't gasp. It didn't react at all. Because moments like this don't arrive with noise, they arrive with absence. An absence of doubt. An absence of authority where it once stood, unquestioned. The woman waited until the last vibration of the manager's phone faded, until the email sat there, unreadable to everyone but her, heavy with meaning. Then she spoke. You've been asking who I am, she said calmly, and why I'm here. Her voice carried without effort. No edge, no triumph, just clarity. The manager looked up, eyes glassy now, caught between anger and disbelief. You still haven't explained anything, she said weakly. You can't just walk in here and... The woman raised a hand, not to silence her, to end the pattern. You called me a fraud, she said, turning slightly so the room could hear every word. In front of your staff, in front of your clients, and in front of law enforcement. She paused. In a bank I own, with 40 resid. The sentence didn't echo. It didn't need to. It settled. The officer nearest them inhaled sharply. A customer near the windows whispered, Oh my God. Someone's phone slipped from their hand and hit the floor. The manager's face drained of color. That's not possible, she stammered. This branch, this institution, is a subsidiary, the woman said evenly. Majority stake, acquired 3 years ago, effective immediately. She didn't pull out documents. She didn't raise her voice. She let the truth do what it always does when it finally enters a room built on assumption. The man in the navy suit looked at her, really looked this time, then glanced back at the printout in his hand. His mouth opened, then closed. He nodded once. The manager's knees buckled slightly. She caught herself on the edge of the counter. I didn't know, she whispered. The woman met her eyes. That, she said quietly, is the problem. Too, and a present. The room felt lighter now, not relieved, but exposed, as if a mask had been pulled away, leaving everyone to confront what had just been revealed. The officer stepped back fully, posture respectful now. Ma'am, he said to the woman, how would you like to proceed? The manager flinched at the question. The woman didn't answer right away. She looked around the room at the tellers, the customers, the witnesses who would carry this moment with them long after they walked out the door. Then she spoke. First, she said, we acknowledge what happened. She turned back to the manager. Because this didn't begin when I walked in. Her gaze was steady, unforgiving, fair. And it doesn't end with surprise. Silence followed. Not the silence of intimidation. The silence of reckoning. And everyone in the bank understood the same thing at once. This wasn't a twist for shock. It was the truth finally allowed to stand in the open. No one moved. The manager stood frozen behind the counter, hands braced against polished marble that no longer felt like support. The authority she'd worn so comfortably minutes earlier now hung off her like a coat that didn't belong to her anymore. The woman waited, not because she needed time, but because accountability always deserved it. Pull the incident log, she said calmly, eyes still on the manager. From the moment I walked in, the man in the navy suit nodded and moved quickly. Too quickly. Fingers flew across the keyboard, no longer casual, no longer confident. Around him, terminals chimed again, short, sharp acknowledgments as access shifted, permissions changed, doors quietly closed in the background. The manager shook her head, voice barely steady. This doesn't need to be formal, she said. We can resolve this internally. The woman turned to face her fully now. You already made it formal, she replied. When you chose public removal over private verification. A pause. When you involved police, she continued, you took away any chance of discretion. The officers stood at ease now, not guarding, not threatening, witnessing. The man in the navy suit cleared his throat. Compliance is online, he said. They're listening. The manager's breath hitched. The woman nodded once. Good. She shifted her gaze to the staff behind the counter. If anyone here was instructed to exaggerate, omit, or mischaracterize what happened, she said evenly. This is the moment to speak. No one answered at first. Then the junior teller, the same one whose hands had trembled earlier, stepped forward. She told us to flag it, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor, to mark non-compliance, even though nothing actually happened. The room exhaled. The manager spun toward her. You didn't have to say that. End up. The woman raised a hand again, not sharply, not angrily, simply enough. Yes, she said. She did. The manager's shoulders sagged. I was trying to protect the branch, she said weakly. The woman's expression didn't soften. You were protecting comfort, she replied, not integrity. She turned slightly, addressing the room now not as a confrontation but as a record. This institution doesn't fail when people make mistakes, she said. It fails when those mistakes are defended. If we can dead restage as to is this. The man in the navy suit glanced at his screen again. Access revoked, he said quietly. Effective immediately. A soft buzz echoed from the manager's badge as the light flickered red. She stared at it, stunned. The woman watched without satisfaction, without cruelty. This isn't punishment, she said calmly. It's correction. The manager swallowed hard, finally understanding. What she had lost wasn't her job. It was the illusion that she'd ever owned the room in the first place. And the room silent, watching knew it too. The bank didn't applaud. There was no cheering, no dramatic release. Justice, when it's real, rarely asks for noise. The woman stood in the center of the room for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle into its rightful place. Around her, systems continued, their work logs finalized, access sealed, oversight activated, not out of anger, out of order. She turned to the officers first. Thank you for pausing when it mattered, she said simply. One of them nodded, respectful now. Thank you for your patience, ma'am. Patience. She accepted the word without comment. Then she faced the staff behind the counter, some shaken, some relieved, some still processing what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't about catching someone off guard, she said evenly. It was about revealing a process that works against people who are taught to stay quiet. Her gaze moved deliberately from face to face. Silence isn't submission, she continued. And professionalism is not an excuse for harm. No one argued. No one needed to. She turned back toward the manager one last time. Not to shame her, not to linger. This moment will follow you, she said calmly. What you do with it is up to you. The manager nodded once, eyes lowered. For the first time, she didn't reach for authority to protect herself. The woman stepped away from the counter, heels echoing softly against marble. The room parted without instruction. People made space not out of fear but recognition. As she walked toward the exit, a customer near the door spoke quietly, almost to themselves. She never raised her voice. The woman heard it. She paused, not turning around, but slowing just enough for the words to matter. I didn't need to, she said. She reached the doors, sunlight spilling in as they opened automatically. The outside world waited unchanged, unaware of what had just been corrected inside these walls. Before she stepped through, she turned once more not to the bank, but to the idea it represented. I didn't come here to prove who I am, she said. I came to see who you would be when you thought I didn't matter. She let the words hang not as a threat, but as a standard. Then she left. Behind her, the bank remained silent. Not in denial, in reflection. Because every person in that room would carry this moment forward into policies, into decisions, into the next face that walked through those doors. And somewhere between the marble floor and the locked terminals, one truth had finally taken hold. Dignity doesn't announce itself, it waits. And when it's ignored long enough, it reveals exactly who never learned how to see it.